Welcome to C60 Health Connections, where we meet with leading experts in the health and wellness space. On today's show, we are going to uncover the reason why sleep is the number one secret weapon for executives, athletes, and anyone who is committed to aging gracefully. We are also going to discuss some easy to implement steps you can start today to help combat stress, anxiety, and deal with PTSD. After the last year and a half that we've just all gone through together, I believe we can all benefit from this information. Dr. Kirk Parsley is with us today. He is a former Navy SEAL turned physician and health and sleep optimization consultant and performance enhancement coach for some of the most driven and high-achieving individuals on the planet. He coaches Navy SEALs and top executives around the globe. I am both honored and thrilled to introduce him to you today. He is passionate about helping his clients and patients achieve the highest quality of life possible while realizing their health, performance, and longevity goals. If you are an A-type driver and sleep is challenging for you, and if stress and anxiety is keeping you up at night, stick around. You do not want to miss this expert advice from one of the world's foremost leading experts on sleep and PTSD. My name is Jessica McNaughton, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at C60 Purple Power. I'm a business executive with years of experience in corporate America. And for more than 20 years, I've been exploring various modalities in health, wellness, and spirituality. Now, before we get started, these statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. Any products or topics discussed today are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. So with that, let's get started. Kirk, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so happy to see you again and have this opportunity to chat with you live.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I take any opportunity to stand on my soapbox, so I appreciate it.
Your resume is so impressive. For our viewers that might not have heard of your name before, Kirk has been on Dr. Oz, TED Talks, all sorts of channels. And you can find him everywhere. He runs with the top dogs. He is a top dog, and he is. You've also got your own podcast show, and people can find you on virtually nearly every single social media channel.
Except Twitter. I've been banned from Twitter for
badge of honor.
I don't know for what, but something about COVID. I'm sure it's pretty outspoken about COVID. So
yeah, educating people on natural health remedies will definitely get you banned.
Yeah. Well,
So
take it or leave it. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's dive right into sleep. As I shared with you, previous to this interview, I've struggled with sleep really since I was a teenager. I've had, gone in and out of kind of bouts of insomnia. And I didn't really realize until, the last few years, kind of the science behind sleep and what it meant for my body. So can we just start off with some of the basics for people who don't know? First of all, why is sleep so important?
Yeah. Well, that's sort of the foundation of everything that I do, and it's the foundation of the reason I ended up in this field. And I say ended up because I didn't pursue sleep. It was just I was working with a population that's having some problems, and I couldn't figure out their problems. And I found out that all of them who were having these symptoms were also taking sleep drugs, and so I had to learn about sleep myself. And I honestly didn't see. I was actually looking to see if the medication they were taking had the side effects that would cause the problems they were complaining of. Never occurred to me that actually missing sleep was going to be the source of their problems. But basically, what it is that every animal on this planet, every mammal on this planet sleeps, and every mammal on this planet uses the sun as its cue as to when to be asleep, when to be awake, except for us. Except for humans, because we can, we have light bulbs. We can make it light when it's dark. We can make it dark when it's light. We can make it cold when it's hot and hot when it's cold. And we've just kind of taken ourselves off the planet and said, we got it from here. We know better. We know what we're going to do. And of course, there's some consequences to that. But we're all born into this contract. Essentially, for humans, it's you can be awake and performant, doing the things that are important to you for 16 hours a day, and then you need 8 hours to recover. And that's not optional. That's like saying, you fill your car up with gas and you can drive 350 miles. Well, you don't get to drive 450 miles just because you want to. So, the contract is there, like you have to do it. Now, obviously you can't stay awake for 48 hours or 72 hours in a row. And so it's not as linear as the gas tank, but you still have to pay that back, right? So there's still consequences of that. And essentially, the way I tell people to think about it is, or actually the way I think about it is that the entire point of me sleeping tonight is to prepare me for tomorrow. And so as I'm awake today, I'm learning some things. I'm rehearsing some things, practicing some things, trying to get better at some things. I'm not truly going to get better at those until I sleep, because when I sleep is when it's all going to be consolidated. But I'm also using a bunch of my resources, right? I'm using energy. ATP is sort of the most obvious thing. I'm damaged if I'm working out, or if I fall or cut the end of my finger off or whatever. I'm actually damaging my body, and that has to be repaired. Energy stores have to be replenished, and even fighting off infections, bacterial infections, viral infections, parasitic infections. All of that stuff is really done while you're asleep. So you basically have these 16 hours with which to perform, but during that time, you're consuming all your resources. You're eating and you're trying to replenish some of the resources, but all of that isn't really getting properly partitioned and placed where it needs to be until you sleep. So when you go to sleep at night, the first thing you'll go to is in a deep sleep phase. And these sleep cycles last about 90 to 120 minutes. So you'll go into a deep sleep phase. You'll transition across that. You'll come out of that and you maybe do a little bit of REM sleep, and that'll be one sleep cycle. And then you'll go back down into another deep sleep. That'll be your next sleep cycle. And so, and during that first one, you're going to be primarily deep sleep. And deep sleep is the exact opposite of fight or flight. So fight or flight is the maximum amount of stress and stress hormones you'll ever experience. Deep sleep is the minimal. It's the exact opposite. And so it's the exact opposite things are happening. Think about all of the things that your body would be doing if you were in fight or flight. And then you reverse that and you say, all right, your body's doing none of that when you're in deep sleep. So, but what you are doing is your immune system is at its highest. You're secreting all of you're balancing and secreting all of your anabolic hormones. So, DHEA and, testosterone and growth hormone, all of the intermediates and downstream regulators of that, IGF-1, dihydrotestosterone, all of that stuff. So all of the anabolic stuff is happening when you're in deep sleep. If you've damaged tissues, if you're fighting off infections, that's maximal effort there. That's when all of that's happening at its most. And then you'll transition out of that, and then you'll do a little bit of REM sleep. And the REM sleep is kind of where your brain's getting reorganized. You're sort of in the deep sleep. You're like flushing out your brain. You're flushing with something that's called the glymphatic system. So there's these structural neurons in your brain that hold the structure, and they shrink down by about 30%, and they create these channels, and this fluid flows through. You flush out all these waste products, and then you start replenishing. You start re-nourishing your cells and rebalancing the neurotransmitters and neuropeptides. You take things that are short-term memory, things that you've learned today, and you put them into long-term memory. You form durable tracks between those and other things that so that that's when you actually know something. When you can work with it, you can manipulate it, you can compare it to other stuff that look at it from different angles. That's when you truly know stuff, and that's happening while you're asleep. So essentially, when you work out, for example, you don't get stronger, right? You get weaker, you damage yourself. So you damage the muscle cells. If you work out hard enough, you actually rupture the muscle cells. And then when you go to sleep, your body repairs that. And based on the damage, it will repair that a little more robustly. So if you're doing strength training, those muscle fibers will repair thicker and stronger, able to lift more weight so that they're less likely to be ruptured next time. If you've damaged your tendons and ligaments from just stressing from working out or just doing physical things, that's when those are going to be repaired. If you've exercised in a way that's, endurance oriented, you're going to repair those, the way those things burn and partition and save fuel, as well as mitochondrial density and all that stuff. And those muscle fibers are going to be more enduring. So to answer your question, really everything that you're getting better at, and repairing everything that you've damaged, that's what sleep is. That's the purpose of sleep. And that's why it's so important, because you can quickly see if you didn't do that part, all you're essentially doing during the 16 hours is consuming resources and causing damage. And so if you don't repair, you have fewer and fewer resources and you're more and more damaged every day. And essentially that's what aging is. If you think about it, a little kid can burn themselves up, like a hot rod, whatever. They can just push the limit, red line it all day. Mm-hmm. And then they can go to sleep and they wake up the next day, not only recovered, but a little bit better. So they wake up like 101% or 102%. And our goal, and so when you're younger, you can see kids waking up. You can see them waking up bigger. You see them waking up stronger. You can see them waking up smarter. And then at some point that sort of plateaus and you're going for a net zero to where you're recovering every day. And then what happens when you get a little older is you don't recover 100%. Because you think about it logically, if I recovered 100%, meaning every bit of damage I did to my body today, down to DNA methylation, if I could repair that 100% every day, I would wake up the same every day, and I would never age.
Right.
But to the extent that I can't keep up, that's how fast I age. So when you purposefully take away 25% of your sleep and you sleep 6 hours instead of 8 hours, you're aging 25% faster, whether you recognize it or not. That's
Dear
the truth.
God.
Yeah.
Okay, so like what happens if you miss a night of sleep, or if you just have like a restless night of sleep? Like maybe you had a big meeting and you went out for dinner and drinks and you had some wine and you just kind of have like some fitful sleep, or maybe you're out too late and you have to get up early for that presentation and you walk in the door running on 4 hours.
So what happens then? So if we can agree that the whole purpose of sleeping tonight is to prepare me for tomorrow. Okay. If I don't sleep tonight, tomorrow still comes. So how do I do it?
Yeah.
Well, I consume more resources. And the way that I consume more resources that are meant for things like that, they're meant for extremists. They're meant for, evolutionarily, they're meant for us being preyed upon, or us having to chase prey, or being in the middle of a famine and having to walk 30 miles a day to try to get to food or whatever. So evolutionarily, that's kind of the purpose of it. So what happens is you wake up the next day and you use additional stress hormones to get you through the day. So stress hormones, they get this bad rap as though it's negative. It's not necessarily negative. It's only it's negative when they're in excess. But stress hormones are actually what keep you alive. So if you didn't have any cortisol, you would be dead. And what cortisol does is it keeps you alert and awake in proportion to your environment. So when you wake up in the morning without an alarm clock, it's cortisol that wakes you up. It naturally climbs up through the day. That little dip in cortisol in early afternoon, that's that slump that we feel. And it doesn't really matter if you eat lunch or not. But that little 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon slump of energy that you feel, you just feel thick and dumb and you want to take a nap. That's a little dip in cortisol. It's built in. I don't really know why it's there, but it is. And it kind of creeps up a little bit. You peak around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then your cortisol starts dropping back down. And at some point it drops low enough to where it's below the level that woke you up. So now you're able to be asleep. Well, what happens when you run a more stressful life, you're running higher cortisol than you need, and it's hard to go to sleep because your cortisol level maybe never drops down to that level that would be conducive for great sleep. And when you think about this in the maximal phase, it's easier, I think, to conceptualize it when you look at the extreme. So when you're in fight or flight, that's the maximum amount of stress hormone your body is ever going to secrete. And it basically turns your body into like a battery, right? It's like you're just willing to consume all of your resources to get out of that situation, because it doesn't matter if you have any resources left, if the tiger eats you, or if you get shot, or if you get in a car crash, or whatever is leading to that fight or flight. So you basically, all your physiology shifts to where you become your own fuel source. And it shuts off a lot of things. So, when stress hormones go up, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your vasculature in your extremities actually, they contract a little and shrink off, so that, if you get cut, you don't bleed as much. Your pain threshold goes up, your reflexes get faster, your bronchial tree dilates, you can take in more air, your pupils actually dilate and they take in a lot more light, but your prefrontal cortex shuts off and you just become completely focused on this. And then cortisol causes you to dump all of the stored glycogen you have in your body, all the stored glucose that you have in your body. It causes you to dump it into the bloodstream to give you energy. Because again, you just have to get away from this threat. And so if you get away from that threat and you survive, you can recover all of that. Now, what's not happening is you're shutting off your digestion, you're shutting off reproduction, you're shutting off your immune system, you're shutting off all these things that don't matter if you don't get away from the threat, which is why we don't run around in fight or flight all the time. We just consume ourselves in a couple of days and we die. So like I said, deep sleep is the exact opposite of that. Okay. Digestion is maximum, immune system's maximum, endocrine, reproductive system, all of that's maximal functioning while you're asleep. Your body's essentially useless. Fight or flight's the exact opposite. So the reason I said all that is, if I don't sleep enough tonight, I don't recover enough tonight, I wake up tomorrow without enough resources. When I get into the part of the day where I don't have enough resources to get through it, how do I get through it? I increase the stress hormones, right? Okay. And in doing so, I push myself closer to that fight or flight. I'm becoming what's called catabolic. So anabolic means I'm taking small things and I'm building bigger complex things, like I'm taking amino acids and I'm building muscles. Where catabolic would mean I'm actually using my muscles as a fuel source for my body, and I'm breaking my muscles down to make amino acids so that I have that for what I'm doing right now. And I'm breaking down the stored glycogen that's in my cells. I'm dumping that into the bloodstream so that I have energy for the fight or flight. And so catabolic hormones are consuming you, anabolic hormones are building you. So when you don't get enough sleep, you just run off of catabolic hormones, which is in itself bad, right? Because you're breaking yourself down. You're using resources that are really designed for extremists. And if it's an occasional thing, then that's fine. That's what it's designed for. But if you're doing this every day, you're not replenishing every day, and you're using more and more of these resources every day, you're digging a deeper and deeper hole. And then it has the added side effect of, well, now you're running higher stress hormones, which means it's going to be harder to go to sleep, especially if you're running high stress hormones into the evening. Now it's going to be harder to go to sleep because your stress hormones are too high to go to sleep. I told you low stress hormones is deep sleep. So if your stress hormones are high, it's really hard to get into deep sleep, and it's hard to get good sleep. And so now you're going to get worse sleep, which means you're going to have fewer resources for tomorrow, which means you're going to need more stress hormones for tomorrow. And it's a self-propagating downward spiral. And you just keep making yourself worse every single day.
This is a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
Are people ever able to make it up? Or are you you have to deal with the fact that because you lost that opportunity and you didn't take good care of yourself and your life got out of control, that now you've just got more wrinkles?
Yeah. So I try to use simple metaphors, primarily because I like to think of things in simplistic terms. It makes it easier to manage them. But I tell people it's like breaking your leg. So if you break your leg and you go to the doctor and get it x-rayed and it gets set if it needs set, and they put a cast in it, and whatever, you ice it, you elevate it, you do all the things, you take it seriously, you walk in crutches for a while, you can come pretty darn close to having 100% normal leg after that, right? I mean, there's going to be some difference, right? Whereas if you just completely neglect it and say, whatever, I have stuff to do, I don't have time to check out my leg, and you hobble around on it. Like, how much longer is that going to be in pain? How much worse is the sort of terminal sequelae, like the terminal situation going to be? Like, how much dysfunction are you buying into because you just ignored that? Well, that's the difference really between paying back what they call sleep debt. Like, if I only sleep 6 hours tonight and then I get up and go tomorrow, well, I have a 2-hour sleep debt. So if I sleep 9 hours the next 2 nights, technically I've paid back that 2-hour sleep debt. Does that mean that there's absolutely no consequences? No, there are some consequences, but it's like taking good care of your broken leg versus just ignoring it and saying, well, whatever, I lost some sleep, I just lost it. I'm not paying it back.
Okay.
Now, I wanted to put a caveat in that I understand that most people don't have a lifestyle where they can just get up whenever they get up. Most people have alarm clocks. Most people are time driven. They have to get their kids to school. They have to go to work. They have meetings, whatever it is. So most people have some drive. But when I'm using this example of sleep debt, when I say paying it back, the only way to truly know if you're not in sleep debt is if you can go to sleep roughly the same time every day and you wake up roughly the same time every morning with no alarm clock, and you feel good and you feel refreshed when you get up. And that time is somewhere around 8 hours, in the ballpark of 8 hours. Then you are what we call sleep adapted. You don't have any sleep debt.
Okay.
What we find is if I just took someone off the street and I said, hey, I'm going to 100% take care of every problem in your life. Your only job for the next 3 months is to sleep. And I'm going to put you in this perfect sleeping environment, and you're going to be in there for 14 hours a day. And then you can go do whatever you want for 10 hours a day. And then all I ask is that you come back, and I'm going to pay you a lot of money, and I'm going to take care of all your problems. If I do that to people, they will sleep on average 12 and a half hours when they first start this. And it will take them about 6 weeks of gradually sleeping less to where they're sleeping 8 hours a day.
Okay.
But then they will lay in this perfect sleep environment. So the research that was actually done, they used World War II pill bunkers, and they put people in this room with a bed. It had nothing but a bed and a toilet in it. So there was nothing to do, and it was dark. They didn't have any lights in it. So they would sleep. They put them in there 14 hours a day, let them out 10 hours a day. And if you do that, and it's been redone many, many times, different cultures, different ways of doing it, everybody sleeps about 12 and a half hours. After a while, they'll get down to about 8 hours of sleep, which is where that number comes from. That's why we know how long it takes to sleep, how much sleep people need. And then no matter how long you run that, you could do it for another year, and they'll still sleep about 8 hours a day, which means they'll lay awake in a cold, dark room with nothing to do for 6 hours a day. So they are completely sleep adapted. Wow. But then if you just take a little bit of sleep away from them, they don't sleep 8 hours the next night. They make it up.
Wow.
If you take 2 hours of sleep away from them, they're going to sleep about 10 hours the next day. So that's how we know that happens. Like that's how we know that's the way it works.
So can you talk to us a little bit about sleep drugs? I know a lot of, I'd call them road warriors, and maybe they haven't been able to be on the road as much this last year and a half. Travel's been limited, and
unless they're like me and they just drive everywhere.
There you go. A lot of road trippers. But I know a lot of folks who, they're drivers. They go, and maybe they're sleeping in a hotel room, and or traveling internationally. They're on a plane. They're taking Ambien or Lunesta or Xanax or something like that to help them sleep. Can you talk to us a little bit about what does that do to your body, and is that productive and helpful, or are we doing damage by utilizing what I'm calling, those are crutches?
Right. So that's a complex story, but the basics of that is that sleep drugs do not lead to sleep. Sleep drugs lead to unconsciousness. So if I hit somebody in the head with a baseball bat and they fell on the ground, nobody would think that person went to sleep, right? If you see somebody chug a bottle of whiskey and fall on the ground, you don't go, oh, that person's asleep. Like, that person's passed out, or that person's knocked out. And we recognize these being different. And we don't need any special equipment to do that. Now, however, if you want to be a scientist about it and be a nerdy doctor, we can put equipment on these people, and we can measure the respiratory rate and their movement and their pulse ox and their brain waves. And we can do what's called a polysomnograph or a sleep study. And we can say, you're moving through these predictable cycles of sleep, you're asleep. If it's just a straight line, like, you're just unconscious. And so if you think about, we have this brain stem that controls like all of our sort of innate behaviors, things that we don't need to think about. So this is like our blood pressure and breathing and our heart beating, and sex drive even is in there. And then we have like this big, wrinkly bit that kind of goes over it, right? And that's what we think about when we think of the human brain, is that big, wrinkly, amorphous kind of thing. And these two communicate, obviously. Now, so this is, we call the neocortex, that big wrinkly bit up top. That's a neocortex, and what the neocortex is, that's our interaction with the world. So that has our motor cortex, our motor cortices in it, which allows us to move and interact with the world. And it has the sensory, all of our sensory. So our vision, our hearing, our sense of touch, our pain receptors, all of that stuff is built into these. And if you think about it, when you're asleep, your eyes still work, your ears still work, your nose still work. You can still sense everything. You just aren't, right? You just aren't paying as much attention to the environment. But the reason you can turn on a light and wake somebody up is because their eyes are still working. The reason you can make a noise and wake somebody up is because their ears are still working, right? The reason you can touch somebody and they can wake up is because their sense of touch is still working. So it's all working, but there's a barrier between you and your environment, but you can be awakened past it. So you can make that transition back and forth across that if you need to. So when you're slightly uncomfortable in your bed, your body still senses that, and you roll over and you get in a more comfortable position, whether you really wake up or not, like, you move around. And so that's what we call dissociation. So there's a dissociation between your brain and the environment. You aren't paying as much attention to it. And we see a lot of this, like we have an experience of this in stage 1 sleep, where you lay down in bed and you get all kind of warm and fuzzy and a little groggy, and like you can hear stuff going off in the distance. Like you can hear people talking, or maybe you hear television, or you hear traffic or whatever, but you can hear stuff, but you realize that you aren't quite perceiving that and tuned into that as you usually are.
Okay.
So that's the beginning of this dissociation. So one of the primary neuropeptide that's associated with that change is something called GABA, capital GABA, all capitals, and it stands for gamma aminobutyric acid. And that slows down the neocortex, and it dissociates us to some degree, but we can be awakened past it to our environment. Now, what sleep drugs are, is they said, well, if GABA does that, when people are having a hard time sleeping, we need more of a GABA effect. So we make a molecule that kind of looks like a GABA, and it binds to the same receptor as GABA. But when it binds to GABA receptors, instead of having the same effect as GABA, so we'll just say that GABA binds this receptor and it has an effect, and that effect is a level 1, right? Like it does it at an intensity of 1.
Okay.
Well, when I put a sleep drug on there, it binds the GABA receptor and it has an effect of 100 or 1,000. And it has this super physiologic effect, and it completely dissociates your brain, which is why you can have an hour and a half long conversation with somebody who just took an Ambien, and they seem lucid, and they have a normal conversation with you, and you wake up the next morning and you try to talk to them about it. They have zero recollection of that whatsoever, because there was a complete dissociation. They were running off of like primal brain. And that's why they were successfully sued so many times. It's because, I was telling you, there's this, survival brain stem, right? The lizard brain, which wants to eat and fornicate and, take risk. And so people were taking Ambien, and they were driving to Vegas and gambling away their life savings and picking up prostitutes, going down to their kitchen and eating like everything in the pantry. And this happened over and over and over again. And this wasn't known when I first got into the sleep world, and I was trying to understand the side effects of the sleep drugs. This was speculated on. There were people going, I think this is going on. Like the clinicians were saying, I keep seeing this with my patients, but there's no literature to support it. And then once they got taken to court, and I think it was Ambien first, but they've all been taken to court now. Once they were taken to court, then they had to release more of their research. Because when people apply to get a drug approved by the FDA,
yeah,
they get to cherry pick the research. So they own all the research, and they say, well, here. And so what it came out to, when all the research came out, they knew this happened. They knew that it dissociated people. People could lay in bed and surf the internet or go on social media or watch YouTube for 6 hours and then doze off for an hour and wake up and think they slept 7 hours because they don't have any recollection of anything. And once all the research was in, when they had clinical studies and they actually had people attached to polysomnographs and they gave them this drug, they were getting something on the order of like 34 minutes extra sleep, and they were falling asleep, I want to say like 13 minutes faster. So if you usually toss and turn for an hour and a half, you're doing it for an hour and 15 minutes, but you're probably only remembering 15 minutes of it. So you think you slept better. Okay. But the worst part was that it decreases REM sleep by about 80%.
Wow.
And it decreases deep sleep by about 30 to 40%. So even though you got 34% more sleep, you actually got way less sleep because you weren't getting, the useful cycles. You weren't getting the true physiologic benefit of sleep because you were, you weren't going through the sleep stages to secrete the growth hormone and testosterone and increase the immune system and all that, and flush out. Like you just weren't doing all those things. So whatever recuperation you got, whatever restorative benefit you got, was diminished significantly. And so with that said, you'd probably think that I would say never take a sleep drug, but that's not the case. Mm-hmm. I'm as anti-pharma as the next guy, but there are periods where it makes sense to take sleep drugs. I personally don't use Ambien and Lunesta. If I have a patient who needs a sleep drug, I usually give them a benzo like Valium, and they don't impact sleep architecture as much, but they still impact it. But I give it to like the widowed wife of a SEAL who just died, and
she's crying all night.
She's just not going to sleep at all if I don't give it to her. And if you're traveling, if you're traveling internationally, and you just have to force yourself to go to sleep, and you can't get away with a supplement can't get away with a supplement like mine or melatonin or something like that to like get you down, then if you're using this thing 3 days a month or something, I don't think it's any big deal. That's just like it would be on par with overtraining when you exercise 3 days a month or something. It's not something to get super worried about. Now, if you use sleep drugs chronically, which in medicine is just defined as more than 6 months, you have the exact same lifespan trajectory as somebody who has chronic insomnia, which again means over 6 months, or somebody who works shift work, who works night shift. Okay. So people who work night shift, people with chronic insomnia, and people who chronically consume sleep drugs die about 12 to 14 years earlier than their counterparts, than the general population. And they have about a 30% disease risk increase to all diseases. In fact, shift work is classified by the WHO, the World Health Organization. It's classified by the WHO as a type 2A carcinogen, which is the same classification as cigarettes, which means that we're pretty darn sure it causes cancer. It would just be unethical to do a study to prove it.
I'm speechless. Okay, so if you're taking these, and I want to make sure I got these stats correct. You said it'll decrease your REM sleep by about 80% and deep sleep by 30 to 40%. Did I get that accurately?
Yep.
And then
Yep.
you are also,
and then alcohol, as an aside, alcohol does the opposite. So alcohol decreases deep sleep by about 80% and decreases REM sleep by about 20 to 30%. So if you take your Ambien with a couple of cocktails, then you guaranteed yourself 0% sleep. And I've seen this 100 times. Sleep studies on people who use Ambien, and I just say, do whatever you normally do, because I want to know what's usually happening. So they go into their sleep study, they have a cocktail and they take their Ambien, they go to sleep. Their sleep study comes back 99.9% stage 2 sleep, which isn't any of the beneficial sleep. That's what we call the transition sleep.
And so then your life expectancy could potentially decrease by 12 to 14 years.
Yep.
And a 30% increase of risk for just disease, age-related diseases.
Yeah, your risk of all morbidity, mortality. So your risk of getting any disease or dying from any disease or dying from anything increases by 30%.
Okay, so what about people that utilize either CBD or marijuana, whether they're eating it or smoking it, or having gummies or whatever to go to sleep? How does CBD or THC impact sleep?
So that's a mixed bag. If you are lucky enough for CBD to help you sleep, CBD alone, which in my experience is only about 30% of the people who try it will get that benefit. If you're lucky enough to be one of those people, you're really lucky, because there seems to be very little. What we call in medicine tachyphylaxis, but that's a terrible name. I can't think of the general term for it, but basically, you need more and more of that drug, so you become sort of desensitized to it.
Okay.
Maybe a layman's way of saying it. So when you first start with, let's say, THC will help you sleep. It does interfere with sleep architecture, though not nearly as much as the sleep drugs or even alcohol. It will help you fall asleep. The quality of sleep, I said, is a little bit worse, even though people perceive it as being better, which is by itself a benefit. So, like, just if you think you sleep well, there's some benefit to that. It would be better to think you sleep well and actually be sleeping well. But we take what we can get in this world, and if that's the best we can get, then that's the best we can get. But let's say if it takes you if it takes like 1 milligram of THC, which is unrealistic, but if it takes 1 milligram of THC to help you fall asleep and you feel like you sleep great on that, within about 60 days, it's going to take you 20 milligrams, right? And at that point, depending on how you're consuming it, you could be consuming a whole lot of other stuff that's actually detrimental. And the more THC you have, the more it interferes with your sleep architecture. So when you fall asleep with 1 milligram of THC, let's say it interferes with your sleep architecture, decreases it, let's say 1%. It's more than that. 1% worse sleep with 1 milligram. Well, 20 milligrams would be 20% worse sleep. But because the THC has sort of, and its benefit, it has like an equal part of detriment. And so that's additive as well. Now, the CBD doesn't seem to show that. If you can fall asleep with 1 CBD, then 6 months later, you should still be falling asleep with 1 CBD. The combination of those two seem to be what we call synergistic. So there is more than additive. So it's like 1 + 1 = 3 or 4, and you're getting a better benefit to it. As far as your subjective experience of sleep, how fast you fall asleep, how long you stay asleep. Now, your quality of sleep, again, decreases a little bit. But, if you aren't getting any sleep and you use this and it leads to you sleeping 9 hours and you're getting maybe 7 hours worth of sleep because it decreases your quality of sleep, that's a lot better, obviously, than, getting 3 or 4 hours without taking anything. The ideal thing, of course, is to figure out why you aren't sleeping, do that work, you know, optimize your life in all other areas around nutrition and exercise and stress mitigation, you know, work on your sleep behaviors or sleep, you know, sleep hygiene or whatever you want to call it, you know, your preparation for sleep, your sleep environment, all of that stuff, optimize all of that and get better sleep.
Yeah.
That's the ideal thing to do. But if you know, if you're talking about, again, if you're talking about international travel, yeah, I mean, I'm not telling you to break the law and take marijuana somewhere, but you know, if CBD works for you, if you have some products that you can travel with, that's better than a sleep drug.
That makes sense. Let's talk about some natural remedies, because I discovered your wonderful product probably about 6 months ago, and I love it. I love your sleep remedy. It is kind of like my nighttime ritual now, and has been really supportive. And I think even just going through the process of making a warm cup of water and putting your sleep remedy in there, it's part of my nighttime ritual. I take a bath,
Right.
do that. I try to wind down, unplug. I don't look at the news. Just try to get into a more peaceful state of mind. So and I know you've got some melatonin in here. So will you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that sleep formulation I came up with, and then, as you alluded to, that was one of the intentions of making it a tea, was to create some sort of time that you're actually going to be involved in ritualizing your sleep, getting prepared for sleep. Whereas if you give people capsules, they can lay in bed and pop a couple of capsules and turn off the light and lay down and go, why am I not asleep yet? Right. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason behind it was I purely invented that formulation for the SEALs. And I wouldn't say I so much invented it for them as I invented it with them, because I was trying to get them off of the sleep drugs. Once I learned enough about sleep and the sleep drugs, I was like, oh, we got to get everybody off of these. And I couldn't just take it away and say, suck it up, buttercup. Like I had to give them something. And so, it started off with just vitamin D3, because I thought that was going to be the big problem. That was at the very beginning of this realization about how chronically insufficient most Americans are on D3 and how that has all these downstream effects. And one of those things is sleep. And I thought, well, they all had vitamin D3 deficiency. So I thought, I'll just give them that. And then, of course, it works a little bit, but not enough. And then I found out, well, magnesium's a cofactor for vitamin D3. So I'll give them that. Right. And then I'll give them some melatonin. And then I learned more about melatonin, and I found out, well, if you give too much of that, then they start becoming desensitized to melatonin. And then you have to keep giving more and more and more. And then there's some there's some unwanted effects of having an excess of any hormone in your body. And so over time, over about 6 months, we figured out kind of the right combination of it. But this was pre-Amazon Prime. And so guys were having to drive all over town and buy all different, combinations of pills at different health food stores and so forth. And it was just a pain for them. They really just harangued me into making that product. And so one of the things they wanted was for it to be in a pouch like that, so that they could, just throw it in they could take a handful of them and throw it in their pockets, and it's not like having to travel with pill bottles and all that. So, so that's the other reason it's a formulation like that. But so the whole idea of that, I go to trade shows all the time where people, the first day will give away a free sample of that. And then the next day people come back and buy it. Usually they come and tell us their story about, whatever their experience was with it. And of course there's selection bias in there, because probably anybody that it doesn't work for doesn't come back. But, so everybody comes by with these great stories. And I'd say half the people come and say things like, I slept 12 hours on that last night, and it's like the best sleep, whatever. And I go, well, that's great to hear. It is, but there's nothing in my product that made you sleep for 12 hours, because there's no sleep effect in there. All I'm simply doing is bringing the nutrients. I'm bringing lumber to the construction site, and your brain is the construction crew, right? It still has to do everything. And all I'm doing is making sure that you have enough nutritional density to do whatever you need to do. And the reason I do that, like you don't necessarily have to have a tryptophan deficiency or 5-HTP deficiency or melatonin deficiency or magnesium deficiency or vitamin D3 deficiency. You don't have to have a deficiency of these things for that supplement to work. Because what happens when I started this thing off as saying that every mammal on this planet uses the sun as its cue, it's when to be asleep and when to be awake. Mm-hmm. And then we've taken that away from ourselves. And so if you look at hunter-gatherers, believe it or not, there are still tens of thousands of people who live on the planet who have never been exposed to electricity. And scientists have gone out and they studied these guys, and they put what's called actigraphy on them, which like one of these watches that sense movement, and they're measuring their sleep from this. And they just put them on these people and they don't intervene whatsoever. And what we found across, a dozen of these tribes who still live like that is when the sun goes down, and if you've ever been camping, you've experienced this, when the sun goes down, they decrease their activities, right? It's dark, they can't see well, there's more danger out there, so they decrease their activities. They start huddling usually around a fire or something, or at least kind of huddle up into an area. They start decreasing their activities, they start decreasing the stimulation in the brain because there's not light and stuff for them to see. They become less active, they become less talkative. And over the course of about 3 hours, they end up falling asleep. They get ready for sleep and they lay down their fur and they, all pile on, whatever. And it takes about 3 to 3.5 hours after the sun goes down for them to fall asleep. And then they wake up right around the time the sun's coming up. Now, we don't do that anymore. And there are consequences to that, right? There's a sequelae of not doing what your body needs to do and then thinking that you're going to still jump right back on the train, right? So it's like the sun goes down, all these changes happen, and then 3 hours later you feel like going to sleep. But we go, I'm going to turn off my light and get in bed, and I'm going to feel like falling asleep in the next 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Like, right. What happened to this 3 hours? Well, what happens in this 3 hours is a lot of changes in your brain. And in order for those changes to happen, you need certain nutrients. And so those nutrients build up, and like your brain has more and more and more of these nutrients. And one of the first things that happened is most people know when the light goes down in your eyes, the blue light specifically goes down in your eyes, and it decreases it causes a signal in your brain to go back to the back of your brain, this area called the pineal gland, which secretes a hormone most people have heard of, melatonin. Melatonin is like the starter pistol that initiates this whole cascade. Hundreds of physiologic changes in your brain start going on. One of those is the production of that neuropeptide I talked about earlier, GABA. That starts slowing down your brain. Lots of things change in your brain, and that's leading to a change in heart rate and blood pressure, body temperature, and thyroid function, and growth hormone, and testosterone, and digestion, and immune. Lots of things are changing during those 3 hours. So all I do with my product is go, well, you didn't spend 3 hours getting ready for bed, but if you had, all of these things would be in your brain and blood system now. So let's just give you that bolus. We'll give it to you all at once and see if that helps you initiate sleep. Now, the other thing about that product, the idea behind it is I don't want to give you 100% of anything. So from the time the sun goes down until the time you wake up, your brain is going to secrete somewhere around 6 micrograms of melatonin. So if I give you a 1 milligram capsule of melatonin, or if I put 1 milligram of melatonin in my product, I'm giving you more than you need for the whole night, and I'm giving it to you all instantaneously. So whatever changes that causes, it's going to cause changes that aren't normal, right? It's not going to be the way you're designed. I'm going to cause an excess of an effect. And then who knows what the sequelae, like what are the downstream effects or what are the long-term effects of that excessive effect? I don't know. No one else knows either. So why don't we just give you a normal effect? So let me give you like 2 micrograms of melatonin. And then your brain has to make the other 4, right? And then I give you all the ingredients to make that other 4 so that we know those nutrients are there and your brain makes those, and you get into a good deep sleep cycle. And then if you've gone to bed with the idea that it's a good idea to get sleep and get a lot of sleep and to sleep as much as you want to, and then maybe you're going to sleep 12 hours because you're chronically sleep deprived. And just like I told you, we put those people in these pill bunkers And they didn't think they were sleep deprived. Like, we
Yeah.
just put them in there and said, sleep as much as you want. And they sleep 12 and a half hours. So when I give somebody permission to sleep and they take this sleep product and they think, man, I'm going to get a great night's sleep, I'm just going to see where it goes. And they let themselves sleep, they sleep about 12 and a half hours. And it's not because of my product, right? It's like my product helped them get to sleep, and then I gave them permission to get to sleep. And then they were motivated to go to sleep. And then they slept this long duration.
That's fascinating. So you said melatonin excretion starts to happen when the sun goes down naturally for us. Does that change with the season? So like right now I'm in Colorado and the days are getting longer. I'm really grateful for that. Just a few months ago, it was
right.
It would get dark at like 4:30, and now it's seeming like this, the sun's starting to go down around 8.
Yeah. I mean, you'll find that you can get super far north, right? Like you obviously, and the days, the days can get really, really short, and the winter nights can get really, really long, right?
Yeah.
And you have to, like, you would have to adapt to that. But what you find is that, at the latitudes that most, like, probably 95% of the population lives in, maybe 98% of the population lives in, you'll find that the shortest nights are somewhere around 9 hours. So at that point, like, you kind of have to play around a little bit to get yourself to, if you're going to get 8 hours of sleep, if you're going to get up with the sun, or you have to wake up well after the sun comes up. So however you do that, but you can block the blue light. This is one of those, what people call biohacks. A term I don't really like, but that's neither here nor there. If you can block the blue light with things like, blue blocking glasses. You can put F-Lux on your computer. It takes the blue light out of your computer. I think Apple has something built into their phones to take the blue light out. You can have light bulbs in your house that don't have blue light in them, or that can phase to not have blue light in them. There's all sorts of things you can do to decrease the blue light, and it's specifically blue light that interferes with your sleep. So you can still have plenty of light, although there are some consequences of having a lot of light, because as I said, one of the things that happens when you're getting ready for bed is that your brain, your neocortex, quits paying attention to your environment as much. If you have a lot of stimulation in there, it's harder for your brain to quit paying attention. And so a lot of light, like, excess of light, can still interfere, even though you've gotten rid of the blue light. It's that other condition. So there's really three things that have to happen to make you feel sleepy. You have to secrete melatonin. You have to start slowing down your neocortex, which is like not paying as much attention to your environment. And then your body temperature has to drop a little bit. And again, these are all natural sequelae of the sun going down, right? So the sun goes down, you're a hunter-gatherer, there goes the stimulation, right? You can't, because we're 80% visual animal, we can't see very far now. It's dark outside. When the sun goes down, our brain starts secreting melatonin, and our brain starts shutting down. There's less stimulation. And because the sun went down, and I don't live in a climate-controlled house, the temperature goes down and my body temperature goes down. And those three things combined are kind of the initiation for helping us go to sleep. And then we go to sleep.
What are your thoughts about next day, if you're sleep deprived, and people that utilize, excess coffee or energy drinks? Can you talk to us a little bit about, is caffeine a benefit, or is it, something that is not helpful to us? And is there a level in which it would be good and a level in which it would be very counterproductive?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting kind of social development. I've seen a lot of this transition. We went through, sleep medicine is about 80 years old. And we went through about 70 years of nobody paying attention to it whatsoever. And then right around the time that I got interested in this field and started reading all the existing research and, training with people and traveling and lecturing myself, that's kind of right around the same time that maybe a year or two after I started, that sleep started becoming a big thing, and it became in the popular media and everybody, and People started publishing successful books on it. I worked with I have a literary agent, and she told me straight up, like, nobody's going to read a sleep book. Like that's just not going to work. So don't even think about writing a sleep book. Nobody's going to read it. But it's grown, and a lot of people understand a lot more now. And I went so far off in a tangent. I'll try to bring myself back in. So the answer to the caffeine problem. So when I was saying that during the 16 waking hours, we're depleting resources, right? One of the things that we're depleting is like the energy produced, like the energy pack, the electricity, the batteries of our life, of our cells. It's called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, every time, so it's this adenosine molecule, doesn't matter what that is, this capital A, and it has a T, 3 T's hanging off of it, and each, or 3 P's hanging off of it, actually. So each one of those phosphate groups, and it doesn't matter what that is, just think of it as P, like you pull a phosphate off the adenosine and it causes this release of energy, and then your cells can use that energy to do what they do. Liver cells do different things than brain cells, do different things than heart cells, but whatever that cell does, it's using ATP to do it. So once you take off 1P, it's no longer a triphosphate, it's a diphosphate, so it's ADP, and then AMP for monophosphate, and then eventually it's just an A. And that is just adenosine. And you have adenosine floating around, and adenosine basically is not only not useful, but it's somewhat irritating and toxic to the cells that it's in, because it's kind of being annoying because it wants the phosphate groups put back on. And we want to make that ATP again. So as you start building up adenosine, it triggers your brain. Like you think of your brain as like, this kind of switchboard that's monitoring everything in your body at all times. And so when something goes low or something goes too high, your brain knows about it and it reacts, and it causes your different organs through neurological input. It causes them to do different things. And so one of the things that happened when you build up adenosine is your brain senses all of that and says, hey man, we've exhausted ourselves. We need to go to sleep and we need to recover. We need to flush out all these toxins. We need to start rebuilding our fuel sources because we have all this adenosine built up. And like I said, when those structural neurons contract and they cause this lymphatic flow, these little canals where your cerebral spinal fluid can flow through and wash out all of the waste products of your brain, and you can start rebuilding, replenishing, and rebalancing everything. That's happening during deep sleep. And that's one of the first triggers that you need to start replenishing everything and start building that adenosine back up to ATP and getting ready for the next day. You wake up the next day with a brain full of ATP and very little adenosine. Again, the adenosine makes you sleepy, and we call that sleep pressure. So essentially, no matter how high your stress hormones are, at some point you can have so much adenosine built up in your brain that your brain's like, we're going to sleep, man, and you're just going to pass out. Now, once everything flushes through and you get rid of all the toxins, now you can wake back up. So if you have really high stress hormones, you'll wake up after the sleep pressure knocks you out.
Wow.
All caffeine does is it binds competitively to the same place that adenosine binds to. So if you occupy all the receptors with caffeine instead of adenosine, you still have just as much neurotoxins floating around, and you still have just as much adenosine floating around, and your brain is still equally as impaired, but you don't feel that sleep pressure because that receptor that triggers that sleep pressure is being blocked by caffeine. So that's all caffeine does. It's really sort of a trick. It's not really giving you energy. It's just taking away the stimulus to make you feel tired, which is different than something like a stimulant like Adderall or something, which is actually causing you to release more stress hormones. And part of the stress hormones are epinephrine and norepinephrine, which norepinephrine is sort of like epinephrine for the brain, which is just adrenaline for the brain. And so it's a physiologic trick to make you feel like you're less tired than you are, but it's not really giving you any energy. Now, interestingly, I don't know the mechanism for this, but caffeine has something called a hormetic curve. So if let's say your feeling of fatigue is this is on the y-axis. So this is more and more fatigue, feeling more and more fatigue.
Right.
And then caffeine we put on the x-axis. The more caffeine you have, like, let me reverse that. This is feeling less fatigued. So you feel less and less fatigued as this goes up. The more and more caffeine you have, you feel less and less fatigued. And then at some point, you take so much caffeine that it actually makes you feel more fatigued.
Yeah.
And that point is actually somewhere around 200 milligrams.
How much is 200 milligrams? If you had a cup of coffee, like, is it a cup of coffee?
So a cup of drip coffee is like a true pour of drip coffee. You'd have to check me on this. I can't remember if it's 6 ounces or 8 ounces. It's considered a normal cup of coffee, but like one normal cup of coffee, which is smaller than what most people pour,
right,
is about 110 milligrams of caffeine. Now, interestingly, as I was waiting for a van to pick me up when I was doing a sleep lecture at this symposium, me and 3 other sleep researchers were sitting around in the lobby of this hotel waiting, and there was a Starbucks in the lobby, and they had this big panel up, this publication up on the wall that had the calories and caffeine and all this of all of their drinks. They have a lot of drinks in there that have 600 milligrams of caffeine. So as you start drinking this, you're feeling better and better, because you're not chugging it, right? Okay. So you're drinking it over time and you're feeling better and better. And then at some point you start feeling worse. And then definitely if you finish it and then go sit in your office for a couple of hours, you've had 600 milligrams of caffeine. So you've actually completed this curve and you're down in the dumpster here. And so what do you want to do? You want to go get another cup of coffee. So
oh, wow. Great.
I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it sure works out to their favor.
So for those of you out there who are accustomed to drinking venti anything, just get a short or maybe a tall. If you buy the venti, just make sure you don't drink all of it.
Right. Or you titrate it out. If you drink 600 milligrams. If you drink 600 milligrams every 6 hours, you're probably okay. As long as drinking caffeine that late in the day doesn't keep you awake, which for most people it does. I usually tell people not to have caffeine after noon because it does interfere with your ability to fall asleep at night.
How does caffeine affect hormones? The reason why I'm asking is I recently did kind of an in-depth hormone test. And the feedback that I got was I had some downcycling of estrogen, and the doctor that I was working with gave me some feedback that, we looked at diet and things that I could do naturally to support myself. And she said caffeine can, impact this downcycling of estrogen. So I'm just curious across the board how it might impact hormones in general.
Yeah. So what I said a little earlier is it's a little oversimplistic. A lot of things I say are, but it's meant to convey a point. So caffeine does ultimately affect your stress hormones, just not to the same degree that something like Adderall would. Like Adderall or those types of drugs, like that's how they work. Whereas caffeine, that's kind of a side effect of how they work. But essentially anything that interferes with sleep interferes with stress hormones, or interferes with hormones, because all of your sex hormones, probably well into the 90s, 95, 98% of all the hormones all the anabolic hormones, sex hormones that you're going to secrete is going to be done during deep sleep. So that's when everything gets rebalanced. That's where your growth hormone secreted. That's where your testosterone secreted. That's where your estrogen secreted. The reason women wake up with hot flashes is because there's a stimulus from their brain, their pituitary gland, it secretes this hormone called luteinizing hormone to tell your ovaries to produce more estrogen because it's sensing that your estrogen levels are low. And when you're menopausal and you can't produce enough estrogen, it just keeps producing more and more luteinizing hormone. And that luteinizing hormone has a stimulatory effect on your cardiovascular system and some of your peripheral tissues. And you start feeling this really hot flush sensation and your heart racing, and then you wake up. And that happens because that's when all your hormones are balancing. Of course, you can get a hot flash during the day, but it's, characteristically, again, 90% of the time you get a hot flash, it's going to be during sleep, and primarily during the beginnings of sleep, the first sort of half of the night, because that's when your hormones are rebalancing. So again, anything that you do that impacts your sleep impacts your hormones, and so that's how it's affecting your hormones.
Do you think that coffee or energy drinks are okay to use sometimes, once in a while?
Absolutely. I don't think that there's anything wrong with them if you're using it in moderation.
Okay.
And if you have, let's face it, people have jobs, people have lives that simply don't allow them to get good sleep every night or adequate sleep every night. And you've got to mitigate somehow, right? You got to do something to keep yourself from feeling the effects of that. Now, the first things to do is to optimize the other aspect of your life, right? Optimize your nutrition, optimize your fitness and exercise routine, and optimize your stress mitigation so that you're not adding to these additional stress hormones by feeling stressed about other things that you maybe don't need to stress over. That's sort of the first line of defense. But after that, if you're waking up with a little excess adenosine in your brain and you're feeling a little sleepy still and having a little caffeine, not a big deal. Obviously, when I was in the SEAL teams, we're dealing with people who don't necessarily have control over your sleep. It's like,
yeah,
you have to go fight the bad guys at night. You can't convince them to wait till noon tomorrow. It's like, you got to go in and do what you have to do tonight. You're not going to get any sleep tonight. Tomorrow's still going to come. We're going to need to mitigate against it. So like we do work around that and try to minimize the effects of all that. And one of the things that we found just sort of, clinically working with guys is that nicotine gum, like nicotine itself, is not a damaging drug. Like that's not the reason that's not the reason cigarettes are dangerous. It's not from nicotine. Nicotine is a stimulant that works in a similar fashion to caffeine. It doesn't seem to interfere with sleep much, and it can help people in a lot of ways. And so we found that about 60 milligrams of caffeine and about 2 milligrams of nicotine every 4 to 6 hours could help guys feel alert and normal for 12 to 16 hours. Whereas a lot of the stimulants, they make you feel alert, but you don't feel normal. One of the effects of stimulants is, again, like I was saying, they work on stress hormones, and one of the things, if you've ever been in fight or flight, you'll recognize that your prefrontal cortex, like your decision making part of your brain, doesn't really work that well.
Yeah.
Because you're not meant to. In fight or flight, you're not meant to think. Like, thinking is too slow of an activity. You're just meant to react and get away from it. And so if you have too much stress hormones, it actually interferes with your ability to make good decisions and to plan. And so if you're running around on that as opposed to sleep, you're more likely to make bad decisions. And it's something like the SEAL teams, it's like, one decision could cost a dozen people their lives. So, we try to avoid any kind of, really harsh stimulants for that reason.
So you mentioned fight or flight, and this is just my own personal opinion. I think our collective has been in fight or flight for the last year and a half. And whether or not someone's been formally diagnosed with PTSD, or they've just been through trauma in their life, or they work in a very intense, stressful corporate environments. And I would say, I think a lot of those do cause PTSD in people. But what are your recommendations right now for people who just generally feel stressed out, anxious? They've dealt with conflict with friends and family, maybe with an employer. People are struggling with really tough decisions around our health and wellness now going forward that could affect, the balance of our life. But what are your recommendations for people to deal with stress and PTSD?
Yeah, so I obviously have done a lot of work with military guys and veterans who have PTS symptoms. Right? We don't like none of them like the label, so we don't ever call it that. But I think it's sort of insignificant. Like most psychological diagnoses, it's all on a continuum, right? Like, have you ever been distracted? Does that mean that you have ADD? Like, okay, like how much distraction do you need to have ADD? How much sensitization to stress do you need to be associated with a past event for that to be a disordered way of stressing? I don't know. I mean, I think that's kind of, it's individualized. What I usually tell people is that if you're experiencing a significant amount of stress on a continual basis every day, then that's disordered. Like, that's something that we need to do better. I mean, life is stressful. That's all there's to it. Like, you can't avoid stress and still live life, but it should be episodic. You should be able to solve a stressful situation and then feel good for a while, and then fall into another stressful situation and solve that and feel good. If your basal rate, if sort of your normal situation is like, I feel anxious and stressful and negative all day, every day, okay, that's where we're at.
Yeah.
And and definitely if I feel hyper levels of stress to where I become incapacitated because I'm so stressed out, that's okay. That's a stress disorder as well. And let's just call them a stress disorder. I don't really care if it's from post-trauma or from your imagination or from your diet or from your exercise. I don't care. Doesn't matter. Like, let's figure out what's causing you to feel bad all day and let's work towards it. And essentially, again, it's easy to think of this like in the fight or flight mechanism. What happens when you're in fight or flight? You hyper focus on one thing. You focus on the thing that's going to kill you, or that's going to kill somebody that you care about or cause you serious harm. What is that one thing? That's all you're going to focus on. Ask somebody in a gunfight what their phone number is. They don't know because they're thinking about the guy with the gun. So when we're dealing with decreasing stress, think of it as a global thing. So you think of a glass, and a glass, so we all have a stress resiliency. So we all have our own size glass. Maybe my glass is bigger than yours. Maybe my glass is smaller than yours. I don't know. But let's say every unit of stress is one drop. Like, how much can my glass hold and it still be contained? And when it's contained, it's still healthy. I can still operate. Once it starts overflowing, then my life becomes, impaired. And I start having detriments to my life because I have too many drops in my glass. Does it matter then where the drops are coming from? Let's say that my glass is 60% full all the time because of changes in me due to an abusive childhood. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe that's something I want to work on. That's something that's going to take a long time to process. But what about the other 40%? Well, if the other 40% is how I'm reacting to traffic, or the fact that I'm not exercising, or the fact that I'm eating a terrible diet, or the fact that I'm using stimulants to stay awake and get through my day all the time, I'm using alcohol to fall asleep every night. Like, I have all these unhealthy lifestyle things that are causing me to fill that other 40%. Whereas if I could just get rid of that 40%, that 60% that I can't get away from, that's due to something I saw in combat, or due to something from my childhood, or due to something horrific that happened to me, or someone I care about, something I saw, I can spend 10 years getting rid of that 60%, and I'll probably only get it down to 30%. But as long as I keep that other 40% out, I can still function in my life just fine. Mm-hmm. And I stole that from a former employee of mine, and I want to give her credit for it, but I can't remember her last name right now. She has her own website and counseling. She's a psychologist. It's a great metaphor. Tara Miller is her name. She's Canadian. All right, so
Miller. Thank you.
Just so y'all know that I didn't come up with that metaphor. I think it's a brilliant metaphor. And so, what do you do to decrease the stress hormones during the day? And you've all heard of this. You've heard of it. There's scientific jargon for it, and there's the woo-woo, airy-fairy jargon for it. But basically, it all comes down to, if you're paying attention to what you're doing right now, you're under less stress than if you're thinking about what you didn't do right in the past or what didn't happen right in the past, or you're thinking about what's possibly coming in the future. So getting into the now, like getting into the moment right now, like concentrating on what you're doing right now will reduce your stress hormones. This is measurable, physiologically measurable. One of the things we did in the SEAL teams, we do these things, it's called CQC. It's like learning how to move through a structure like a house and shoot the bad guys in the bad room, in the different rooms, and make good decisions. Don't shoot the good guys, shoot the bad guys, make all these complex decisions. And while you're doing this in a really rushed, hurried fashion, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of potential for making a bad choice and harming people, right? So it's something we train really, really hard at. And we monitor people's heart rate variability on this. And as we run them through, when you have a very low heart rate variability, that means that you're really stressed. And we can predict how well you're going to do, like how many bad decisions you're going to make, how accurate are you, how well are you going to communicate, how well are you going to move. We can predict that by your heart rate variability. And we can improve that by improving your heart rate variability. And we can do that with something as simple as what has been dubbed box breathing. So inhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, inhaling for 4 seconds, or 6 or 8, or whatever you want to do. And why is that? Well, the breathing itself has some physiological changes on it, because when you engage your diaphragm consciously, you have to control your stress centers of your brain a little bit, because as most people have experienced fight or flight, experience that breathlessness, it's because your diaphragm becomes somewhat like partially paralyzed when you're under a lot of stress. So consciously engaging your diaphragm helps. So that's the reason particularly we go for breath. But if you think about it, all we're doing is causing you to block out everything else and think about your breathing. Now you can do this all throughout your day. This is a ridiculously simple thing. Everybody laughs at it. A lot of my interventions are so simple that everybody laughs, but they still work great. And here's a really simple one that I tell my clients, because a lot of my clients are very left brain, scientific, metrics driven entrepreneurs. And they are not into anything esoteric or airy-fairy, and they don't want to hear about meditation and being in the moment and all this other stuff. So I just say, well, I simply want to decrease distraction. And so in order for you to decrease distraction, I just want you to do everything that you can possibly do throughout the day with your left hand. So I want you to open your car door with your left hand. I want you to open every door with your left hand. I want you to, eat with your left hand, brush your teeth with or let's say your non-dominant hand is the better way of saying that. And why am I doing that? Is there anything specific about that that's decreasing their stress? No, I'm just putting them in the moment. They have to think about turning the doorknob instead of walking through the building completely distracted, thinking about all these bad things that could possibly happen in the next hour if this doesn't happen, or if that doesn't happen, or if he says this or she says that. What could happen? What if this funding doesn't come through? What if the sales channel dries up? And you can't think about that and think about using your left hand to open the door, and your left hand to use your mouse on your computer, and the left hand to open your car door, and your left hand to grab some M&Ms as you walk by, whatever. And then you can add on to that. And just a lot like sleep hygiene, people always ask me for these perfect sleep hygiene guidelines. I don't know what works for you. I can tell you the 3 things that we're aiming for, right? We want to decrease blue light, we want to decrease stimulation, and we want to decrease your body temperature. How you go about that, you have Google. You can go and you can look up anything you want to and figure out how you're going to decrease the light. You can figure out how to, whatever. You don't need me for that. So the same thing is true for mindfulness. If you will engage this idea of mindfulness, you don't need me to tell you how to do it, because it's going to be dependent upon what you like. Some people like to meditate. Some people don't want to meditate. Some people want to do breath work and sit down and do it. Some people don't want to do breath work. Some people want to do breath work while they exercise. Some people want to do guided meditation, and some people want to use diurnal beats and put these headphones in that essentially change your brain waves by putting a different frequency in each ear. Some people want to take naps. Some people, like, I don't care what you want to do. You just need to convince yourself to do it. And the easiest, again, like the gateway for my clients who are really resistant to this is like, I just want you to use your left hand. And then anything else I can do to distract them. Like, I don't care. Like, as long as I can get them to focus on something that brings them into the moment. Some people like tell, I want you to count your steps every time you leave your office. I want you to, every time you notice that the time is like right on the hour, I want you to think about how your feet feel on the floor. Like, I don't care. Like, whatever it is, whatever you can talk that person into. And if you're dealing with yourself, yourself. Like, what will you really do? Don't set yourself some lofty goal of, I'm going to meditate 3 times a day for 20 minutes a day. Right. If you don't like meditation and you've never meditated before and you have a busy day and you hardly ever sit still, don't do that to yourself. It's not going to work. Like, you're not going to magically become somebody else. Maybe a year from now, if you really focus on this, you'll be doing that. But start off with what you know is realistic for yourself.
So stay present, stay in the present moment, focus on your breath, keep yourself distracted so you're not thinking about the past or the future. And if you don't know how to do that, use your left hand or your non-dominant hand. So maybe another outcome is that we become ambidextrous in division.
Exactly.
Less stressed out. I kind of love it. It's like a side effect.
And kind of one of the what I think is the best metric for this is to get yourself an Oura ring or some type of wearable.
Okay.
At least at the beginning, so that you can see what your heart rate variability is. Okay. And that's the thing I care about the most. And I'll briefly explain that. So when if you have a heart rate of 60, on average, your heart is beating 1 time per second, right?
Okay.
Well, it doesn't beat exactly on the second every time, right? Like, it's not exactly 1 second apart. If you did, that's a heart rate variability of 0 because it's not varying whatsoever. It's beating exactly on the second every second. Now, if it's varying by, 30%, like from 0.7 to 1.3 seconds, that's a pretty broad variability for for a time that small. And that would be a high heart rate variability. And essentially what's happening is you have a node in your heart that, absent all other stimulus, absent all hormones, absent anything in your bloodstream that could trigger it. So like, you just take away all stimulation to it, this node is going to beat your heart about 40 times per minute, 30 to 40 times per minute, no matter what. And it's going to, and we think of this as the parasympathetic. So we have this, what we call the autonomic nervous system, which you could just think of as the automatic nervous system. So it's driving things we aren't thinking about. It's driving my heart rate right now. It's driving my blood pressure right now. It's driving my kidney function right now. All this stuff is happening. And it's being controlled by this system that I don't have any real input on, but except my nervous tension does have an input on it. So when I have a lot of stress, the branch of this called the sympathetics, which is the fight or flight system, the sympathetics are dominating. And if you just think about what does your body act like and behave like during fight or flight, that's sympathetic tone. Parasympathetic is the exact opposite. Again, that's deep sleep. That's sitting around on your couch, digesting a heavy meal and just feeling like a fat tick and relaxing. And like, that's parasympathetic. So again, if you have absence, all stimulation, the parasympathetic node in your heart, the AV node, that is going to beat your heart 30 to 40 times per minute, no matter what. Every bit of sympathetic tone that I put in, every bit of stress that I put in is going to cause my heart rate to beat a little faster. So if sometimes my heart's beating because there's sympathetic tone, and sometimes there's not enough sympathetic tone, and my normal node in my heart is causing it to beat, then I have a big variability, right? It's parasympathetic is firing it, sympathetic is firing it, and it's alternating back and forth, and I have high heart rate variability. If I have too much sympathetic tone, this is the most common thing, and when I have too much stress hormones, my AV node or my parasympathetic never caused it to beat. So it's my sympathetic tone driving every beat, which is very consistent, which is a low variability. There's not much variation to when my heart beats because it's being driven by stress hormones. So if you can get your heart rate variability up, we know that you've balanced out your stress hormones. That's the best way to know that you've balanced them.
That's awesome. I did not know that. So kind of my big takeaways from today, if you care about how you look, how you feel, how you perform, how long you're going to live, what kind of quality of life you're going to have, then you really need to dial in and focus on your stress level and the quality of sleep that you're getting, because it impacts aging, lifespan, and decision making. And I think it's common sense. Like, people should know it, but like I have to be honest, up until just a couple of years ago, I wasn't valuing or appreciating or really understanding the impact of, a poor quality of sleep or, very little sleep, like 4 to 6 hours a night, and high stressful environments, how that was taking a toll on my health and potentially on my longevity. So
common sense isn't all that common with these things. Like,
not today. No.
I mean,
no.
I'm the same way. I mean, I didn't know anything about sleep when I started all this. It never occurred to me. I mean, I chose probably the two worst professions you can imagine for sleep. Neither one of being a medical doctor, being a SEAL, like, sleep is a luxury that you take whenever you have the opportunity. Right. And if you're good at your job and you're serious and you're professional, you just won't sleep when there's not time to sleep, which is obviously bollocks. It's the worst idea ever. But yeah, I was forced to learn about it because the SEALs were having problems that I couldn't understand, and they didn't have a disease, but they weren't performing well. They weren't performing up to their level of expectation, and so we had to figure it out. So it's not really common sense. It seems like it would be, but yeah. I mean, I didn't know anything more than 90% of the people listening to this podcast right now know about sleep. 10 years ago, I was a doctor. I'd been out of medical school for several years, and I didn't have a single class in medical school on sleep. I knew what sleep drugs were. I knew their mechanism of action, but I didn't really know what the side effects of them were, or like how they were affecting sleep. I didn't even know how to measure sleep. I didn't know I knew there was a such thing as a sleep study, but I didn't really know what went into it or what it really meant. Not many people know much about it, and it's the most important thing we do. It's by far the most important thing we do. Everything that you do during those 16 wakeful hours is like your ability to do those things, and the reward of having done those things is all driven by what happens during those other 8 hours.
Thank you so much for your time today. I really want to recommend anybody who's interested in learning how to sleep naturally. And if you're open to creating a nighttime sleep ritual, I highly recommend it. I myself have, like I said, I've struggled with sleep since I was a teenager, and it's only just been recently that I can say I'm really enjoying sleep. I'm going to give a big plug here for Dr. Kirk's Sleep Remedy. He has been generous enough. If you go to docparsley.com and use the code SLEEPNOW10 on your first order, you can get a discount of 10%. Again, that code is SLEEPNOW10. And I recommend you just go ahead and sign up for a subscription, pass that code, and just get a subscription. So you'll be on a monthly, you'll have your monthly dosage of Dr. Parsley Sleep Remedy. Also, he has a free ebook if you guys are interested in learning about some additional techniques, which we did not talk about today on this podcast, about how you can combat both stress and help support a healthy night's sleep. docparsley.com/stress for that free ebook. Did I miss anything on that?
Yeah, there's also a free PDF, which is specifically designed for people who stress is interfering with their sleep. So it's a way to diminish stress and manage stress while you're sleeping, or while you're getting ready for bed and while you're sleeping. That's one of my sort of simplistic tools that people kind of laugh at. It just seems way too easy. But it's
more of that.
It's probably the most powerful tool I have when I work with my clients. It seems ridiculous. It seems like, oh, this is way too easy, but it makes a huge difference in people's ability to sleep without stress.
That's awesome. So you guys can get that PDF by going to drparsley.com/stress. Download that, just enter in your email address, and he will send you that PDF/ebook, and you'll be off to the races. You guys can follow Doc Parsley on pretty much all social media channels. Just Google Doc Parsley or Kirk Parsley, and you'll be able to find him. Check him out. He's all over. Kirk, thank you so very much for your time today. This has just been so informative, and we went well over time, so I'll probably divide this into two podcasts so people can have a little bit.
Keep the suspense rolling. Perfect.